What's up, everybody? Sean Letty with Sean Letty Creative, and a little while ago I posted a before and after picture, and when I did, I had a lot of people messaging me asking me how I turned this into this. So I'm going to show you. So let's jump right into Lightroom and let's get started. Alright guys, so here we are in Lightroom, and as you can see I have the photo. This is what the photo looked like straight out of camera. And up here you can see some info. I shot this on my Sony A7 III at an ISO 1250 at 70mm focal length. I have a 24-70, and this was all the way out at 70. The f-stop was 2.8 on this, although with this many people, usually I'd be shooting at like an f.8 or something like that to make sure everyone's in focus, but it came out pretty good, and at 1/800th of a second. It was kind of golden hour. We were facing right towards the sun. So for the temp, I think I warmed this up just quite a bit from straight out of camera to about 64, let's say like 6448, something like that, I think is kind of where I had it. Yeah, that's probably good. Let's call it about there. The tint I put to like a -2, brought it a little bit more towards the green, bring some of this out. The exposure, I brought this up about 1.5 stops, because it was getting kind of dark in that golden hour, so kind of brighten everyone up, and we'll adjust some of this stuff back in a bit here. Anyway, we'll bring the highlights down and that kind of thing. Usually, like I said, I just kind of go through and I get a, kind of do a basic edit on the photo before I do any coloring or anything like that. The highlights, as you can see, we got to bring those way down, recover some of that detail back in the sky. Yeah, it looks pretty good there. And shadows, I brought those up just a smidge. Just to kind of bring out some of the light on the faces and things like that, since they were kind of away from the sun was kind of behind them, so they were a little bit darker. And the whites, in a photo like this, I would bring those down quite a bit, just like we did with the highlights, just to kind of tone down those whites a little bit. I'm also looking at my histogram here, and there's obviously going to be some clipping in a photo like this, but we can bring those down quite a bit. And then the blacks, I actually bring those up just a smidge as well. And so, that's looking pretty good. And we are going to kind of do a faded look on this afterwards, so I'll show you how I do that. Vibrance, I always like to bring the vibrance up, kind of pop some of the base colors that we have on here. And then I actually bring the saturation down. The difference between vibrance and saturation is that saturation will bring all the colors a little bit more intense, and then vibrance is going to focus on some of the cooler colors and leave the skin tones. So I do bring the saturation down just a hair, so it starts looking something kind of like this. Then what I did, because in a photo like this, there's a couple different ways you can attack things like blues and greens, and I do like to mess with these a little bit. So in the Hue Saturation and Luminance, the HSL panel here, after we get done kind of doing a main basically a main adjustment on the photo itself, I like to come here and start messing with a couple of these things. So like with the hue and the green, I wanted to bring the green much more towards the blues. And so when you see, if I slide this around, you see the greens are just jumping all over the place. You can make them way more yellow, give it kind of that fall look. But if you bring them towards the blues, and we're actually gonna desaturate those here in a second as well, it just kind of takes some of that, like, I don't know, like it gives it kind of like a more modern look in a way. So I moved those pretty far into the blues, and then with the blues, I actually moved those down into more of like the teal range. You see, like, they can be really purple. If they're kind of in the middle, they have that like dark navy, but I kind of like them in the more teal range. So I'm just gonna bring this down to about 20, let's say about 29. And now we're starting to get kind of like that cool vintage summer vibe in here. You'll see the blues have changed quite a bit. If I turn this off, you'll notice that's quite a big change to the photo as it is, right? Then I hop over to my saturation panel, and this is where I can kind of tweak some of these things. So I did pull the reds back just a hair. And the oranges I pulled back just a hair as well. The yellows I pulled way back, and you'll see that changes the green even more towards kind of like that blue area. And then let's see the greens. So this is kind of where I take the greens way back and I fade them out probably to about 70. Let's go like 78, something like that. There we go. Okay, cool. So yeah, now you're starting to see this is kind of getting a little bit of that vintage vibe there. Looking pretty cool. And then I took the blues and I actually increased the saturation on the blues to really make that teal color kind of pop. There we go. We're at about an 18 there. And already you can see, I mean, if I show you guys, whoops, let's see. I'm going to try and get the original up here. We want to do, whoops, that's the edit as it was when I finished it. But let's do, we don't want that. We want, there we go. Yeah, see that's, oh, before and after of that one. Just because this was a copy of that copy, so it's actually not going to do that for me. But if we were to, let's go back to our regular view here. Basically, you know, this is the photo, how it's going to end up when we're done. And then, you know, this is where we've taken it so far. And if I turn off a couple of these things, you'll see right away, you know, that it's already starting to have a certain look to it just by changing some of those colors around. And this is why, you know, I tag things like color grading or whatever, because it really does. I mean, you're shifting those colors around to get this sort of like vintage look here. So so that's what I do in hue and saturation. And, you know, then I'll probably come down and for my sharpening, I usually create a nice little like, you know, step ladder effect here, and it gives it just a little bit. Luminance, what that does is it takes any of the grain, as you can see in the photo here, and, you know, it will kind of reduce some of that grain. It'll smooth some of that out. So I usually don't go past 20 on that, because if you go way up, they start to look like super smooth and you lose a lot of that detail. So I bring it to about anything under 20 is usually pretty safe. Now this is looking pretty good, but it doesn't quite look like this, which was that finished photo, right? So there's a couple of things in the secret sauce, so to speak, that I do, and one of those things is split toning. Okay, so you see here in the split toning panel, I like to make the highlights kind of like a, you know, especially for something like this, we're trying to create like a warm summer afternoon look. So I like to move this up into like the yellow range, kind of reddish yellow, maybe like 35 or something like that. And then, so what that does is it sets the color, okay? And then if I go way up in saturation, you'll see that color. I mean, it's like orange, right? We don't want to go that far. All we want to do is maybe around like 16. And then let's just take a look at the difference here. Okay, that's kind of faded back. Now we've added a whole lot of that summertime warmth into it just by tinting the highlights that kind of orangey yellow. But then we are going to do the shadows as well. So for the shadows, we're going to go way up here into kind of the purpley blues. I think it was like 280 or something like that we did. And then again, not a huge amount, right? Because you don't want it to be like whoosh, magenta, right? But if we keep it way back here into kind of like the 16 range or something like that, watch this, right? That's without split toning and with split toning. And that's doing a lot right there. That's looking pretty darn good. So we only just have a couple of things left to do. One of those things that we're going to do is we're going to mess with the tone curve here. So one of the things I kind of like to do with the tone curve, I'm going to drag this down just a bit to bring a little bit more of that contrast back. And then I'm going to lift the blacks here. And this is kind of how we're getting that faded look. If you go way up, you'll see it kind of mattes everything. Like that's like super matted. But if you just lift them a little, like that's no lift, and you just give it just a little bit of a lift, you'll see now, boom, look at that. You kind of have the summertime look. And now, you know, that's the final edit that we did. And I think I probably, if we go back here, yeah, there was maybe just a little bit of tweaking on the stuff over here. on that tone curve. Let's, yeah, see, and we lifted these highlights a little bit. There we go. Now we're getting that pop, right? So this is, we're creating a bit of an S curve here on the tone curve, lifting those blacks out. And I'm gonna go to the final edit, and we're pretty darn close, as you guys can see. There's the one we just did, and then here's the final edit that I put on Facebook. And if I hit Y, you'll see this is kind of the before and after look. And there's the after. So you guys can really see, I mean, just by tweaking your basic settings here and applying, you know, some shift in color using the HSL panel, and then of course the split toning, that's really what's giving you the difference between, you know, a picture like this straight out of camera and then something that has this real dreamy summertimey look. So yeah, so make sure you guys get your main adjustments down. And here, I'll turn some of these off. I'll turn the tone curve off. I'll turn the HSL off, I'll turn the split toning off, and this is the photo, basically just the clean edit that I did on this photo, right? And then let's layer these things up. So again, it's white balanced now, exposure's been corrected, a little bit of contrast, bring the highlights down and recover some of this detail in the sky, bring the shadows up, vibrance up, so that everything starts to look real good. And then, so again, right, that's, you know, straight out of camera, basic adjustments right there, okay? And then you go in and you shift the colors a little bit more towards the teal, and with the greens a little bit more towards the blues. You add that nice tone curve to give it just a little bit of pop, and then matte those blacks just a little bit on that S curve. And then finally, the secret sauce is that split toning that gives you just that extra control over the color of the photo and what that really looks like. So so there it is, guys. There's the before and after. I hope you guys liked this tutorial. I hope it made some sense. I hope it taught you a thing or two about how I do what I do in Lightroom, and it gave you some of the secret sauce. What am I doing to get that kind of dreamy look from a raw photo? And that's the other thing, guys. Make sure when you're taking your camera out, if it has the ability to do so, make sure you're shooting in raw, because that's how you're going to get the most amount of control over your photos when you bring them into Lightroom and start those edits. So thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, keep it creative.